When God created the light and placed the light as suns and stars into the cosmos, the earth cried to God and asked for her share. And God heard the cry of earth and sent all his angels. They cast their light into the earth, and it was turned into crystals and gems.
There are many legends and fairy tales about precious gems and crystals. We have all grown up with them. The worlds of our tales are filled with treasure, shrouded in adventure and danger, guarded by dwarfs and dragons. They beckon the able to rise them from the depth of the earth. Princes of mighty empires wear sparkling gems in their crowns and scepters as symbols of their power. The myth of Atlantis awakens the memory of the magical powers of giant crystals. Yet the story that brought me onto the trail of these gems is new. It finished with a very strange sentence. We need to become crystalline from within. Even though intuitively and poetically I understood this sentence, it kept going through my head. Something was different about this sentence. It was not because of history or myth, but because it pointed towards a mission for humanity's future. And so, I decided to explore the relationship between humans and crystals.
Gems and crystals have always been valuable companions, fascinating people through their beauty and their energetic properties. The relationship between humans and gemstones certainly dates back a few millennia. The oldest artifacts that prove this are amber, well over 10,000 years old, that have been engraved. So obviously, jewelry was made out of it. It was not just found like that. If we look into the different cultures, be it the shamanic, spiritual, or even the Christian and Islamic traditions, in whatever traditions, we always find crystals in each of these cultures. They were certainly used in cults even then. They have been found as burial objects, and only certain things were even added to the graves. I would say it really started first with precious stones, and later with magical stones, healing stones, when the first high civilizations arose. So to make a rough classification of the different eras in which gems have played a role, one might say that it began in the Stone Age. I would even call that the archaic phase, where people still had to trust their intuition. They did not have science in the modern sense, so instead they used their life experience. I think people first experienced then that there was more to these stones than just their beauty and outer form. I think this archaic experience certainly led to the first applications as healing stones. We can still observe that today. Stone Age cultures, primitive peoples still exist. There you can see how they use stones, some as healing stones, simply because of what these people can perceive directly, because they can, to a certain extent, communicate with the stones. The subsequent period I would call the mythological era, where civilizations arose, such as in India and Sumer, where the stones were given a place in the cosmology, or were assigned to the planets, signs of the zodiac, or the gods.
Und danach eigentlich vom alten Griechenland
And
angefangen.
then, starting with ancient Greece, I would call the natural studies phase, where stones were explored, where they come from, where they played a role as ores and as source materials. That would be the period starting with the Greeks, the Romans, and the early Middle Ages.
Der Römer bis ins frühe Mittelalter hinein. Und dann kam eigentlich von
Then came Arabia, the medical phase, during which stones were made into medicines. They were ground and processed alchemically so that minerals were made into drugs. Even then, that has continued until today, resulting in homeopathy and spagyrics, which use the traditional alchemical recipes.
alchemistischen Rezepturen ja bis heute noch weiter tradiert. Und danach würde ich sagen,
Then came the scientific phase, with the emergence of mineralogy and geology in the last 300 years. The medicinal uses fell into the background because you could not explain how stones work in that way. And then in the 20th century, the esoteric phase came, when the circles of anthroposophy, the medicine of Hildegard of Bingen, and modern esotericism sparked an interest in the healing properties of stones again.
Heilwirkung der Steine entstanden ist. Und heute, denke ich, haben wir so eine
Today, we have a synthesis of all these different phases. They have not replaced each other, but each subsequent one has added to the others. The archaic has remained just as the mythological, the natural studies, the scientific, and now also the esoteric. Today, we have the opportunity to draw from all of these sources and see what can be applied and what works in practice.
in der Praxis dann auch bewährt.
Today, ever more people are interested in precious gems. Increased prosperity and a seductively large supply of gems from all over the world are not the only reason for this.
Es gibt sicherlich in der modernen Zeit, und da kann man
Certainly, in modern times, the last 25 years in particular, many people have turned to the energetic qualities of stones. More and more people out there have discovered stones for themselves. They experience something like a calling by the stones. They are attracted by certain forms of stones or certain crystals, and they like to have them as a companion.
der Steine von bestimmten Kristallen gerufen werden und die gerne als Begleiter bei sich haben.
Ich denke, durch gerade die
I think the industrialization and the technologization of the last century increased our rational and scientific thinking. This cut the mystical, the intimate connection to stones. But over the last 30 or 40 years, we find, especially in Europe, but also worldwide, a remembering, a searching, as if the soul of the world is remembering that there is an important store of knowledge and healing that went missing, that needs to be recovered. Influences are coming from all directions.
ging, denn es gilt wieder zu bergen und es kommen Einflüsse aus allen Richtungen zum Tragen.
Es ist ja so, dass viele Menschen mehr und mehr
Many people would like to take responsibility for themselves in terms of their own development and their health. People are looking for ways to naturally strengthen their inner balance and restore it.
nach Möglichkeiten suchen, auf ganz natürlichem Wege innere Balance zu stärken und wiederherzustellen. Viele Menschen fühlen sich einfach auch durch die Art der
Many people also find modern medicine too overwhelming and not supportive. People are looking for opportunities for other ways. One of the ways they find is using the forces of rock crystals and gems.
sozusagen begegnet, ist die Anwendungsform der Kräfte von Bergkristallen, der Kräfte von Edelsteinen im Allgemeinen.
Dazu, denke ich, kommt die Sehnsucht
There is a longing for the soul in nature. Our model of science has told us that it is an illusion, what shamans, Indians, primitive people and our ancestors believed and lived, namely that each tree has a soul, every lake, every rock. The anonymity that has been instilled in us has made our life become cold and hard. We have no relationship to other beings because we no longer believe that they exist. I think the time has come for all of us because we only have one path of development available to us now, namely the spiritual one. We want to know why, how, where. The material world cannot satisfy us anymore, and now the movement that asks this question has grown very big. Today we have developed with our thinking, but also through science, a much larger consciousness. We also need this to comprehend the spiritual concepts at all.
Die spirituellen Konzepte überhaupt fassen zu können. Natürlich gab es in jeder Kultur.
Of course, there were teachings in every culture that had answers for small groups of specialized intelligent people. Today, it is about the whole world wants answers.
But let's look at the gems themselves. Under intense pressure, deep down into the earth, in a process lasting millions of years, elements are transformed into objects of pure beauty, pure form, and pure light, like ambassadors of eternity.
Ja, wie alt die Edelsteine sind, kann eigentlich kein Mensch.
Nobody can say exactly how old gemstones are actually. They are much older than what we know. Scientists are talking about 50 to 500 million years of age for individual stones. The most important and interesting thing is to just realize that we are dealing with the oldest things, one might say, on this world. Spiritually speaking, with the most ancient beings who are here on Earth, who are still in their original body, which is not destructible, which does not decay.
Immer noch in ihrem ursprünglichen Körper sich befinden, der nicht verwüstlich ist, der nicht vergeht. Vom mineralogischen Standpunkt aus betrachtet ist die Entstehung.
From the mineralogical point of view, the formation of quartz crystals is not so unlike to us humans. And it is amazing, when going through the relevant literature, how metaphysical it reads. It begins at conception, one can say, in a crevice, in a cavity in the rock, in the mountains. It is often tension joints that have been dragged into a vacuole. Steaming hydrothermal fumes, a solution that is highly energetic, pressurized, and heated and enriched with minerals, splits water into hydrogen and oxygen, and the oxygen combines with the silica.
Da spaltet sich das Wasser in Wasserstoff und Sauerstoff, und der Sauerstoff verbindet sich mit der Kieselsäure, mit dem Silizium, die aus dem Gestein herausgelöst ist.
The silicon that has been removed from the rock into the nutrient solution, and form small seedlings, just like the first cell of life grows from a fertilized egg. The resulting seedlings in this tension joint form as a precipitate and nest in the outer shell of this vacuole, just as in a womb, like a fertilized egg in humans.
Wie eine befruchtete Eizelle, die es beim Menschen auch vollbringt. Fällt jetzt zum Beispiel solch ein Keimling,
If such a seedling falls onto the right culture medium in this way, then it automatically continues to grow like this. Then that determines its direction of growth and represents something of a genetic trait which leads it.
im Sinne da, nach der er sich weiter richtet.
It could be considered sacrilege to mine these precious stones, to cut them from the mother lode to which they were connected for eons. Their wonderful beauty, though, is not fully revealed until they reach the sunlight. It is often by coincidence, when water and erosion bring gems to the surface, that a deposit is found. Sometimes they are discovered while mining for ores or stones. Michael Vogt is a geologist, explorer and expert not only for precious stones. We will accompany him to a deposit in the middle of a forest where he retrieves the stones from near the surface.
Der Ort, zu dem wir jetzt fahren, liegt mitten im Wald.
The place to which we're now going is located in the woods. It was once a quarry. Above it and below it are layers of plaster and celestine.
Schichten von Gips und Celestin. Edelsteine können auf unterschiedlichste Art und Weise an die Erdoberfläche gelangen.
Gems can get to the surface in various ways.
Dann zum Beispiel
On one hand, by weathering and erosion, then also by landslides when a mountain breaks away.
bei Verwitterung hat man natürlich auch häufig dann die Edelsteine, die in der Regel ja sehr
Weathering also often reveals the gems on the surface that are very, very hard and have separated from the host rock, which has eroded away.
Das heißt, man kann
This means that you can collect the gems and identify a deposit in this way.
die Art und Weise die Lagerstätte identifizieren.
Furthermore, gems accumulate mainly in rivers.
Sammeln sich natürlich die Edelsteine in Flüssen hauptsächlich. Die Entstehung der Edelsteine findet statt.
The creation of the gems is continuously occurring, all the time, during the various geological activities in the Earth's crust. You have to examine closely how is the gem formed, and then you look at the surrounding rock. And then you can, of course, draw conclusions on the age.
Wobei man auf
You could be off by 1 year or 100,000 years, though.
natürlich niemals genau etwas sagen kann. Wenn in einem Drusenraum, in einem großen Drusenraum Mineral
If mineralized water exists in a certain geode, and this compacted rock, which contains this geode, when it cools down slowly, if during in a period of 50 to 100,000 years, it cools down by 1 degree, and water under pressure can indeed be several hundred degrees hot, you can imagine how long it must cool down to be really cold afterwards. The crystals grow within a certain range, so you can already guess that the growth could have taken hundreds of thousands to millions of years.
Hunderttausende bis Millionen Jahre gedauert haben könnte. Hier Übergangsschicht quasi.
Here is the transition layer of the Jurassic to the Cretaceous. Above these rocks, there are these sulfate-containing layers, which we can't see now, of course, because it's covered. Let's suppose we wanted to expose them. Then we would have to work for hours to days, because everything is accumulated here and falling down. I guess you would have to dig at least 2 to 3 meters.
Da müsste man mindestens sich 2 bis 3 Meter reinarbeiten.
The mystical aura of the autumn forest and the strange, unreal sound of hammers and picks through the fog remind me of a treasure hunt as in a fairy tale from childhood. For a moment, I worry we might awaken the spirit of the mountain. Even in its raw, unpolished form, a crystal is full of beauty. Its full beauty is only released by human hand, though. The art of cutting and polishing gems requires mastery and love for this special material. A special sense for its potential is what turns a raw stone into a work of art. The traditional gemstone cutting workshop of Ernesto Biel in Hunsrück is one of the last of its kind in Germany. Modern, brightly lit workshops do not have this charm anymore, even though the work there has become easier and cleaner. Michael Giger's mission in life is to explore the inner potential of stones. He has studied crystals and their effect on humans for 30 years. The modern study of the healing properties of crystals in Germany is mostly due to his work.
Die moderne Steinheilkunde können wir zum einen mal entwicklungsgeschichtlich.
We can examine the development of modern crystal healing therapy. Today, so many different sources, scientific as well as spiritual, are available. This has allowed crystal healing medicine to develop in the last 30 years in ways that were previously not possible, in ways that combine different fields of knowledge, not just examining scientifically or spiritually, but in a holistic way that benefits humans. Modern crystal healing has taken very different paths worldwide. The starting point clearly was the United States. Crystal healing was only revived because Indian knowledge was passed on to white people. It was authors like Katrina Raphael, Jane Ann Dow, and Dara Sarai Chokran who all learned from the shamans and have then translated it into our Western perspective. So there is a branch that is based on tradition, that has been passed down for centuries. Channeled knowledge was added to this pretty quickly, both in the US and to some extent in Europe. But the focus here was the United States. This came, for example, from Garudas, who has written about gem elixirs and where knowledge was drawn directly from spiritual sources. I personally do not do it, so I cannot say much about that. But interestingly enough, in the case of Garudas, it was applicable, so that he has brought new things that have turned out to be true.
Here in Europe,
you would actually have to say, in German-speaking countries, we have gone a different way, because we had homeopathy as our model. The different fields have fertilized each other. You naturally look at what others are doing, what knowledge others have gained. Ultimately, what works well and can be repeated determines what is used, whether it comes from traditional sources, from channeling, or if it comes from our more analytical work. I am also very pleased to say that no boundaries were created, but that there was communication, mutual fertilization, and respect for each other's method for the sake of results. You could say quite simply, who heals is right.
Sagen, wer heilt, hat recht.
Analytical crystal healing is the attempt to bring all the different things in an orderly system. Therefore, we have taken the stones themselves as a reference point. Their origin, their structure, their color, their minerals, and tried to look what effects go back to what origin. If stones with similar color have a similar effect, then it must have something to do with the color. Or if stones with similar structure have a similar effect, it must have something to do with the structure. It was not certain from the beginning that it would work. It was an attempt to organize things by their effect and to investigate, but it has been confirmed greatly in practice. Because analytical crystal healing has thus become a system that has more order than, for example, homeopathy or other systems. You don't have to memorize the therapeutic properties for individual stones and only need to understand the basics. And you could then deduce from the basics which effect the stone could have. I purposely say could because you can never predict with certainty. There are basically 4 major factors that have a role in the effect of stones. The color, of course, is the most obvious factor, and that colors have an effect is also well known. Also, every element, every mineral brings its own effect. Iron brings up completely different qualities in a stone than magnesium or calcium. The third aspect is the structure of a stone, how the pieces are arranged and what forms they get as crystals. And the fourth element is the process of creation. I think it's understandable that a volcanically formed rock has a completely different power than a stone that was formed by weathering and deposition. All 4 of these factors, on the one hand, determine the effect of the stone, what it can be used for, and also to which people it fits best. We humans are indeed individuals, and not everyone responds to a stone in exactly the same way. With these 4 factors, we can determine the right stone for the person in a very specific situation.
The effects of crystals are not only explained by their specific properties. Humans, with all their complexity, constitution, ability to resonate, and their entire bodily, mental, and emotional being, also always determine the kind of influence a crystal has and which process it will support.
Stones will affect people at all levels. Funnily enough, 20 years ago, when we started to do research with stones, there were really 2 camps, because there were people who said stones are matter, so therefore they only affect the body. The others said, wait a minute, stones work energetically, so that can really only work on the mental and spiritual levels. From our own observations in research groups and also in natural medicine practice, we can say that all levels are affected. Humans are not just their physical bodies, but surrounding and penetrating them are different energetic layers. We can call them energy bodies. That means there is an energy body. It is called the etheric body, which extends 5 to 10 centimeters beyond the physical body. This etheric body is like a blueprint.
Und dieser ätherische Körper ist wie eine Blaupause. Das heißt, all die Organe, die wir
All the organs that we have in the physical body, we can also find in the etheric body. The ethereal body supplies the physical body with vital forces. Additionally, humans have as spirit soul essence an emotional expression, an emotional body, one can say, because it is also an energy field, which can be felt by people who have subtle perception.
ist für Menschen, die feinstoffliche Wahrnehmung haben. Und hat einen mentalen...
And humans have a mental body, that is, a body of thought that goes beyond the emotional body. Some spiritual traditions speak sometimes of other spiritual bodies, which I do not want to explain in detail now.
Körpern, ja, die ich jetzt aber nicht im Einzelnen weiter erläutern will. Die
The
Zwiebelmodelle
model of layers, which we find indicated in so many books, do not only correspond to the layers of this energy body, but we have to imagine it as more pervasive. The emotional body is around us and in us as well, and it has a major center in our physical body, which is in the thymus.
in unserem physischen Körper und das ist im Bereich der Thymusdrüse.
And these bodies are part of our everyday life. We constantly think, we perceive things. We have our emotions that we spread around us. We have our physical vitality. And this body, or through these fields, we also communicate and interact with the environment. That is why you can feel the moods of others or catch the thoughts of others. And of course, all these areas can also interact with stones, because the stones have these fields too. The various factors of stones, color, origin, structure, minerals, all together determine the information of the stone, so to speak. And this information is now being transferred to us basically in two ways. Firstly, every stone has a radiation. It absorbs energy and heat and releases the energy received at certain frequencies again, which can then act as a carrier wave for this information, similar to radio stations. And secondly, each stone, everything basically, vibrates when it is heated, and these vibrations produce sound waves.
Das heißt, wir müssen uns das etwa so
That is, we have to imagine that such a crystal is steadily clocked at a certain frequency. If I bring this crystal now into my energy field, it synchronizes the vibration of my energy field. We cannot change it. He is constantly evenly clocked, says science. But our electromagnetic field adapts to its frequency.
passt sich seiner Frequenz an.
In uns kommen diese Wirkungen.
These effects or information arrive in us in a way that we react to it. What we experience as effect is actually our response to the information. So you could say, because we perceive these things, they are effective in us. That also means stones don't give energy. They are not batteries from which you get unlimited power. They only give an impulse, like an idea or an intention. We carry out this impulse with our own life energy. It is always through our own strength that it comes into motion and causes an effect. A stone can act on the spiritual level. It suddenly brings back memories. It helps us take perspectives that we have long forgotten. It helps remember your goals in life again. It may work on the emotional level to release feelings. It can work on the mental level, so thoughts are really changed, and of course there are many physical effects.
Es können aber auch Erinnerungen an frühere Leben kommen.
It can also bring memories of past lives when they have an important message for us. It can happen just as visions of the future that later actually occur, so that one finds that the effect of the stones have significantly strengthened our spiritual potential. So the effect can be very, very different. You should always be aware subtle healing does not work with the principle of pleasure. It can be enjoyable, it can be wonderful and ecstatic, but it can also be very uncomfortable and painful. If old pain, old traumas need to come up again in order to get free. Consequently, one should not judge the effect by whether it was pleasant or unpleasant, but you should reflect on how you are afterward.
Reflektieren, wie geht es mir hinterher?
Die feinfühligen Erfahrungen des Menschen lassen sich ganz schwer.
The sensitive human experiences can be quite difficult to put into words because the language with which we express ourselves, the language that we have learned, offers too few possibilities. If you ask an Eskimo about snow or ice, then you will notice that they have 50 words for snow and even more for ice. This is part of their world, their perception, where they have developed precise terminology. We are only beginning to be interested and open to subtle levels again. We do not have the exact terminology. This needs to be developed.
Die müssen sich erst entwickeln.
Zu dem immer wieder verwendeten Begriff der
About the repeatedly used term of subtle energies that many therapists and crystal healers use. To again respond to this, you should be aware this term is indeed somewhat unscientific, which we will now explain with scientific words. There the difficulty already starts.
mit wissenschaftlichen Worten erklären wollen. Hier fängt die Schwierigkeit ja schon an.
Menschen, die bioenergetisch arbeiten.
People working bioenergetically use the term energy in the sense of life energy. This is a slightly different concept than the physical and technical term. Energy in physics is always something that is measured quantitatively and basically shows how much work is being done or can be. The energy of life has something to do with this physical energy term. It is more about energy structures, or rather, the free flow of energy, or the other way around, about blockages in the flow of energy in a living system. So this energy term is more about order, structure, flow, and movement.
Ordnung, auf Struktur und auf Fluss, Bewegung ausgerichteter Energiebegriff.
Quartz crystals, especially rock crystals, are somewhat special amongst the family of crystals. Their purity and their specific elementary and physical properties distinguish them from other minerals, not only in experience, but also in their possibility of application.
The word crystal is often misunderstood and misrepresented. It is used mostly for rock crystal. The word crystal describes nothing more than a geometrically growing form. A geometrically growing form expresses itself mathematically. For example, in a crystal, the opposite surfaces are always parallel. There are mathematical rules that prove that a crystal from the smallest molecule up to full-grown, meter-sized crystals follow the same geometric pattern. In mineralogy, this is called a crystal lattice structure. Each crystal has a growth axis, which is the so-called C-axis. The crystal is composed of smaller tetrahedrons, that is, silicon and oxygen formed in the shape of the tetrahedron, which is a four-sided pyramid.
Formen sich in diese Form, das ist ein Tetraeder, eine vierseitige Pyramide. Und diese Tetraeder setzen
and millions of these tetrahedrons form a spiral shape and go in tunnels through the crystal to the tip of the crystal. The energy flows along these tunnels in rock crystal.
Entlang dieser Tunnel fließt im Bergkristall die Energie.
Large computer companies that have researched crystals for many years have proven that this crystal lattice structure actually has a similar function as an antenna. Hewlett-Packard, ITT, Schaub-Lorentz, all the big computer companies did years of crystal research, where they found, for example, that crystals have an electrical and optical axis, which is often or usually in the direction of their growth form, that is, in the direction of its tip. A grown crystal has an antenna function, and thus a capability of transmitting and receiving energy pulses, that a fragment of a mineral, or a tumble-polished stone, or a non-crystalline formed mineral does not have.
Das heißt, die innere Struktur des Bergkristalls, der ist
Concerning the internal structure of the rock crystal, that is, for example, piezoelectric, which means pressure creates a primary electric field around the crystal. The special property of the rock crystal is the internal arrangement, the molecular structure. This structure, the way the molecules are arranged in rock crystal, creates an optimal flow of information and energy.
diesen optimalen Fluss an Energie und Informationsübertragung.
Let us again return to the computers. As I said, no computer today could function anymore without quartz chips. No traffic lights, no cars, no aircraft. Our entire technology depends on the quartz technology. One should therefore actually talk about the crystal age in which we live, in the way as in the Iron Age, when everything was dependent upon iron.
Wir leben ja im sogenannten Informationszeitalter.
We live in what we call the information age, and that includes that we are aware on several levels of the dynamics of information, what it does in people. Spiritually, we become more conscious of the thought forms we send out, including feelings and emotions, that these have a direct impact on our own energetic being, but also on the condition of others.
Auf unser eigenes energetisches Befinden, aber genauso auf das Befinden anderer Menschen.
Nun, die Quarzchips machen vereinfacht.
Well, to put it simply, the quartz chips do nothing other than bundle information and enhance the clocking and transmission of it. This is the main capability of quartz, and that's what all kinds of healers make use of as healing tools.
Mit Quarzen als Heilungswerkzeuge zu nutzen.
Der Kristall als solches hat die
As such, crystal has the property to emit energy and to receive it. It is the sender and the receiver. It has the capacity to transport energy from one level to another. That is, if I put thought energy and thought pulses into a crystal, then it brings them into a measurable electromagnetic spectrum.
elektromagnetisches Spektrum hinein.
The practical work with such sensitive tools requires a lot of knowledge, attention, and respect. Lukas Kohlweg is an energy worker. His purpose is to harmonize the energy body of humans. His futuristic instruments and installations combine specifically made rock crystals arranged in special patterns into complex systems. These support his work on the energy body of humans.
Ich verwende Kristalle hauptsächlich in Energie.
I use crystals mainly in energy healing devices, in crystal healing devices that are designed for different functions. The healing table is to give someone a full body treatment. The various healing devices allow one to connect to the soul and to put one's karmic processes into motion, or to balance the chakras, or to control the energetic system of the glands. These are used as needed.
Vorhanden sind und die werden je nach Bedarf eingesetzt. Wir haben es schon erläutert, dass
We have already explained that crystals, due to their structure, attract and release energy. That is, when I connect the crystals together in certain layouts and patterns, then I can create energy fields. And if I possess the knowledge of the form, then I can connect the shapes together and therefore interconnect certain energy functions. Depending on the pattern, there is an energizing, which can then either be used to release energy, if someone wants to let go of something, or to introduce energy.
Energie rauszunehmen, weil der Mensch das loslassen will, oder Energie einzuleiten. Und zum Zweiten kann ich sie natürlich auch schleifen.
And secondly, I can cut them, of course. I can facet them and therefore let them radiate energy very specifically. I can pulse them. They can produce a soft mist. Depending on what therapy I have in mind or what kind of problem I have, then I have to decide what I need to do. Do I need a sharp beam now because I have to get through something? Or do I need a fog because I want to be caressed? Or do I need a pulsation because I need to stimulate something to make it work again? These are the important possibilities of crystals, namely the decision of how I use them. And that is also the knowledge that is inside the healing devices.
Das Prinzip des energetischen Heilens beruht darauf,
The principle of energy healing is based on the fact that we can change the energies in the body. We cannot change the past, but we can change how we handle the energy of our experiences. And working with energy requires, if you now want to use them for energy balancing, or indeed for development, that we begin to control our reactions and that we take our behavior into our own hands.
unser Verhalten selbst in die Hand zu nehmen.
Donald Freeman Yaskola is an international trainer for working with Vogel cut crystals. These crystals distinguish themselves through the exclusive purity and very precise cut. Their facets, with precisely calculated angles, greatly enhance their national ability to receive, store, and release information.
Das Wissen, was zu mir gekommen
The knowledge, what has come through to me about rock crystal, is based mostly on the findings of an American scientist and mystic, and his name was Marcel Vogel. Marcel Vogel was someone who worked for 27 years at IBM, who did a lot of liquid crystal research, and who was spiritually inclined and mystical. He brought together spiritual and scientific knowledge in a unique way and explained the properties of rock crystal in detail.
und hat die Eigenschaften des Bergkristalls detailliert erklärt. Der Marcel Vogel hat eine besondere Art der Kristalle.
Marcel Vogel developed a special type of crystals. I want to show such a crystal that has been cut into this form, unlike a conventional uncut crystal. The properties of the rock crystal are optimized in a so-called Vogel-cut crystal.
Des Bergkristalls sind in einem sogenannten Vogel-cut-Kristall optimiert. Der Bergkristall als Sender und Empfänger.
The rock crystal, as transmitter and receiver, the way it comes out of the earth, is like a radio signal, which has not been adjusted properly. There is a great addition of noise, and the actual information signal cannot be accurately transferred. To offset this disadvantage, he has developed the so-called Vogel cut crystals. They are cut in such a way that they make the transfer of a precise signal possible. They are made so that they send out a coherent signal, that is an equally oscillating electrical impulse, and that makes them unique in their use for healing work.
Und das macht sie in ihren Möglichkeiten der Heilarbeit einzigartig. Dieser Bergkristall ist in einer
This rock crystal has been cut into an 8-sided form, and it has been discovered that the more sides, the more facets such a crystal has, the stronger the spin of energy and inner reflection, and the more stronger the output of energy is from such a crystal.
die aus so einem Kristall kommen. Vogelkat-Kristalle unterscheiden sich von normalen Bergkristallen.
Vogel-cut crystals are different from normal rhinestones or most polished crystals in that they are cut exactly and precisely in their angles. They are cut along the growth axis, and they must be, and that makes a Vogel-cut crystal in exact resonance to the vibration of water. Water has a specific frequency as measured on a radionics device. The rock crystal is cut so that it comes into the same frequency. If both match exactly, it is called a Vogel-cut crystal. There are only 2 grinders in the world who have the ability to do that. Many of the crystals which you can find on markets or at gemstone dealers that imitate this form have nothing to do with a Vogel-cut crystal, you need to know. This is a very special, one might say, highly tuned tool for therapists or for people who do energy work.
Oder für Menschen, die Energiearbeit machen. Der ursprüngliche Vogelkat-Kristall hatte 4 Seiten. Inzwischen
The original Vogel-cut crystals had 4 sides. Now there are Vogel-cut crystal variations with more facets, 6, 8, 12, or odd numbers. The higher the number of facets, the greater the energy is reflected in the crystal itself and amplified. That does not mean that the more facets, the better the crystal. But each crystal has its own special preferred application. Anyway, it is a fallacy in male thinking to always think the stronger the better. Especially when working with subtle energies, one learns very quickly that a precise but also gentle pulse with the correct information vibration is much more effective than any strong, overwhelming energy.
als irgendwelche starken, überwältigenden Energien. Die Erkenntnisse, die zum Beispiel Marcel Vogel über die Bergkristalle
The findings that, for example, were formulated by Marcel Vogel on quartz crystals and their possible application in relation to the structuring of water or the like are all based on the findings and development that goes with the information age. One of the approaches to work with the crystal is to use its capacity similar to how we use computers, though perhaps with a little more dedication. And that's the interesting thing about the crystal, that it calls and asks us also to very respectfully deal with all levels of creation.
sehr respektvoll mit allen Ebenen der Schöpfung umzugehen.
If gems and crystals have such an effect on the human energy body, namely that their vibrational quality and the energy of intention can be transferred as information to a living being, then the question arises if this effect can be proven or even measured.
The effects of stones are directly detectable. There are, for example, biofeedback devices that show immediately how, through the effects of a stone, changes in the body appear.
Dieses Biofeedback-Gerät funktioniert.
This biofeedback device works with a skin resistance measurement. Due to the specific skin resistance measurement, values are obtained which are stored in the computer. The device displays the energy or aura image of the most important organs that are also found in the reflex zones of the hand, visible on this graphic. All of this is much inspired by traditional Chinese medicine.
Und das Ganze lehnt sich stark an traditionelle chinesische Medizin. Also eine Messung läuft folgendermaßen ab.
A measurement procedure is as follows. The subject places his hand on a board with 40 pins. At first, the current state of the person is measured. Then we analyze the measurement.
Dann analysiert man die Messung. Der zweite Schritt wäre, dass man aufgrund der
The second step would be to select a particular stone based on the analysis and place it in this person's hand. The moment when the stone touches the skin, the picture changes.
Das Bild. Der Ist-Zustand hat sich
The person's state has changed considerably, as can be seen here. There is a lot more energy in the body now, here at the bottom of the graphic, the knee, the elbow, and so forth. Previously, it was relatively low.
vorher schon relativ reduziert. Das ist sozusagen der Beweis, dass
This is the evidence that due to the characteristics of the stone, the condition of individual organs, or possibly the mood of the whole person, the whole body changes.
der ganzen Person, des ganzen Körpers ändert. Eine ganz wichtige Aussage der traditionellen
A
chinesischen
very important statement of traditional Chinese medicine is that every disease has a spiritual cause. This has been confirmed in a very, very large number of measurements. If, for example, the energy or aura picture changes and only turquoise, green, and blue colors are shown, then you can assume that everything has changed for the better.
alles zum Positiven verändert hat.
Die Kunst dann den
The art to find the right stone has remained an art. This is not only possible with methods, and instruments can only be a tool. Ultimately, this requires more know-how and consciousness of the user.
An extensive experimental setup is needed to measure the field changes that occur by installing crystal energy devices. The biophysicist Dr. Walter Medinger has been researching the effect of electromagnetic fields on humans for many years. The instruments he has built specifically for this purpose are able to measure very fine electromagnetic fields.
Also wir haben den
We have fetched the technician to find out what effects magnetic frequencies have on the human system. That was the reason why we brought the technician, to see if it's measurable. Whether that which is perceptible to humans can also be measured, and also to read from the data collected what crystals do, and how and in which direction we can investigate further. I have used a grid method for measuring the magnetic flux density. This is the size in which you usually measure the strength of a magnetic field. The measurement is made for the vertical component of the magnetic field. The goal is not to capture the full magnitude of the field in all three directions, but the structure of the field. Therefore, the measurement in one direction, because the measurement values then change when the magnetic field changes direction, even if it maintains its strength, its total field intensity. The device which is used for such measurements is called a Tesla meter. A Tesla is namely the unit of magnetic flux density. This is a very large unit. We usually measure in microtesla, because the strength of the natural magnetic field in the direction of measurement in Central Europe is about 40 microtesla. The value fluctuations and the natural variations of the geomagnetic field are in the range of tenths of microtesla. If we can detect effects that go significantly higher, then we say they are significant.
Können wir signifikante Effekte?
If we can see significant effects, then we can show changes in the structure of the magnetic field on the basis of these fine readings. The total energy of the magnetic field remains approximately the same, but it is distributed differently. That's what our measurements should show in this case, and what would be enough to prove a healing effect in the sense of life energy.
Zu belegen. Bei diesem Versuch diente die Magnetfeldmessung.
In this experiment, the magnetic field measurement was used as a tool to determine whether the healing table, especially when activated by a healer, has changed the field somewhat. The magnetic field is indeed primarily a field of order, so with this field, we have the best chances of getting physical, objective evidence of such changes.
Objektiven Nachweis solcher Veränderungen im Raumfeld zu bekommen.
If you approach such a goal in a technical way, you must first determine the background. That is, which magnetic field conditions are present in the room itself.
Und wir haben dann in einer weiteren Messreihe
we made a further series of measurements a little above the table by stretching out a measuring sheet there whenever a client was on the table. So we could then compare these values with the background measurements, with the magnetic field of the table without human influence.
Magnetfeld des Tisches ohne menschlichen Einfluss.
The results provide a kind of map or terrain display, as seen here on the screen, with a three-dimensional representation. Here the heights were combined to the measured values. Here the measured values were arranged by height. In this case, we see the measurement, which was made on the ground. You can see that the field is quite restless. There are relatively severely fluctuating values. The next display shows the field as we measured it on the measuring table. It is much more balanced, which shows that the installation in itself provides a good balance of the magnetic field values.
Der Magnetfeldwerte schafft. Diese Situation wurde ebenso auf dem Tisch.
This situation has also been measured on the table in the presence of the energy worker who has activated a certain energy program. We see that the field is still pretty balanced, but there are small differences to the previous image. To make it clearer, I use the difference of the measured values between the two previously described situations.
Zwischen den beiden vorher erläuterten Situationen aus. Die Differenz ergibt dann den Effekt, den
The difference is the effect that Lucas caused by activation of the energy programs. We see in this chart a structured effect. Upon closer inspection, you can see a kind of grid line, especially in two preferred directions. These are reminiscent of the magnetic field structure, as they are found on well-known energy spots, places where people feel special bioenergetic effects and where healings occur.
Wirkungen verspüren und wo auch Heilungen vorkommen. Damit konnten wir objektiv
This enabled us to objectively provide evidence that Lucas is able to structure the field in this way. Particularly noteworthy here is that the strongest measured effect occurs right here, where the energy worker sat during the session.
Während der Sitzung saß.
Wir haben dann zum Ende hin, nachdem wir die unterschiedlichen
Towards the end, after we displayed the different energy levels, we were able to recognize in the measurement that this energy has a measurable effect, especially that a human in the process has a huge impact, and that the energy worker in the process is also visible as the one who directs the energy.
in dem Vorgang auch sichtbar wird als der, der die Energie leitet.
Such measured results are still the exception, though.
I think the development of science and technology in the modern world and modern spirituality, especially spirituality, has learned from technology or science, precisely because these findings, which have been made to the smallest scale, down to the atom and even further, as well as to the largest scale, that is, into space, how our universe is structured, are something that was quickly integrated into the spiritual worldview. The opposite direction is a bit more difficult, although there have been more and more scientists, starting from Max Planck, who noticed that the more they investigate, they reach the limits of the mind. They realize that things are not only material, not only physical, but that there is something like a spiritual reality, thoughts that have an effect and similar. But these people are few, because they must go against their own doctrine of science and are often treated with hostility or even dismissed as crackpots. While in the reverse case, it is natural, as a spiritual person living in the modern world, to look at and use modern scientific findings. Hence, the path from science to spirituality is easier than vice versa.
Die klassische Naturwissenschaft hat
Classical science has no answer to the question of why such effects are healing or energizing. In reality, we now certainly have explanations for these phenomena.
haben wir heute durchaus Erklärungsansätze für diese Phänomene. Die wissenschaftlichen Denker, die am weitesten vorangekommen sind, ausgehend von der
The scientific thinkers who have made the most progress based on quantum physics have not stopped at these barriers that the field of physics has shown us. These are the smallest scales, the so-called Planck scale, as it is called in physics. One cannot go below this scale with physical means. But we know today that there is a reality beyond these barriers. Leading thinkers describe something beyond that being the range of spirit, and that consciousness, the mind, is woven into the fabric of space and time.
Der geistige Bereich liegt und dass der Geist, das Bewusstsein gleichsam eingewoben ist in das Geflecht von Raum und Zeit. Und wir können das auch von der wissenschaftlichen Seite her heute so.
And we can tell from the scientific side today, because we find that the smallest elementary processes are affected by this.
Von dieser Seite her beeinflusst werden. Nun wird oft eingewandt, dass Einflüsse
Now it is often argued that influences at this elementary level would be so weak that, for example, the thermal motion of molecules, which always have a degree of uncertainty, would wipe it all out or compensate it. But if we now consider that there is the phenomenon of the so-called coherence, where many molecules behave identically according to certain laws, then it means that patterns are amplified tremendously on an elementary level.
Dass Weichenstellungen auf elementarer Ebene ungemein verstärkt werden können. Wir wissen zum Beispiel,
we know, for example, today that in water approximately 13 million individual water molecules join together into coherent structures that vibrate in a strictly coordinated way. Then water molecules do not act individually anymore, but collectively, and that means a huge amplification. And this is an effect that occurs constantly in our body fluids. Water is indeed the main constituent material of our body. When a certain field structuring influence through such coherence is reinforced in our body, it's only a small step to imagine that even incredible effects in the body are possible. And in the cells, water is 100% coherent. That is also the reason why biochemical reactions in a healthy cell are ordered and so wonderfully run. If we understand coherence as a particularly high degree of order, then the question arises, how can you create order, or how you can support the body in the reestablishment of order if something is out of order?
And a
wonderful example of this kind that nature offers us are crystals. We also know that water is purified during its natural path through the ground, through its contact with minerals, crystals, and becomes structured thereby also. Rock crystal has a lot of similarities with the element of water. Water, when it freezes, takes on the same hexagonal shape that we know as a snowflake. Stones are now often placed in water, and then this water is ingested as gemstone water. Apart from the subjective effect, it can be demonstrated here that a change has taken place in the water through the information. Methods such as the water crystals by Emoto or the drop image method by Ruth Kübler show that water actually changes qualitatively without any substances brought into the water, but only by the information which the water has absorbed.
To think of gems and crystals only as tools for harmonizing human condition, though, would be a disservice to realizing the true potential of both the stones and humans.
Even beyond their healing power, crystals are absolutely justified or can be of help. Basically, we can say that if we are doing fine, if we feel normal, then there still is much to learn. Basically, stones can help to acquire skills. If you want to train something specific, if you want to learn something, this can be from learning to play an instrument through to expanding your own awareness. Their crystals can provide a useful support.
Meine persönliche Erfahrung ist, dass Kristalle im Besonderen
My personal experience is that crystals in particular promote the development of humans energetically and accelerate them. It goes along with the change of consciousness, with the change in the awareness that more and more people are opening up to the subtle levels of perception. And since the crystals are highly experienceable at these levels, people are opening up to crystals and their properties.
Sich die Menschen auch für die Kristalle und deren Eigenschaften.
Consequently, we can use healing crystals not only for physical healing purposes, but they should primarily be used for emotional stability and above all, to support spiritual development. There are wonderful healing crystals that act as spiritual catalyzers, with whom we can go through processes very quickly, for which you previously had to do years of therapy. That, to me, is really the main advantage in using crystals, that we have in our spiritual work great helpers and tools that facilitate and accelerate the work.
Mir erschien es immer so, dass die Kristalle uns, und das lässt sich schwer beweisen, sondern nur
To
beobachten.
me, it always appeared that crystals, and that is difficult to prove, but can only be observed, encourage us in the development of our subtle awareness possibilities. That through the crystals, our consciousness is enabled to perceive beyond the normal spectrum of awareness. Crystals are helpers on our path. They are not, I would say, something that magically gives us consciousness, but they encourage us to develop our own ways.
Bewusstseinskräfte schenkt, sondern sie regen uns an, unsere eigenen Möglichkeiten zu entfalten.
Das heißt, von unserer geistigen Entwicklung
From the viewpoint of spiritual development, the crystals, the healing stones, are for me personally the strongest tool to grow a divine consciousness, to mature, to what all religions speak of as the goal, namely unity consciousness.
nämlich zur Bewusstheit der Einheit.
A developing awareness that recognizes the same spiritual foundation in everything will easily also include the crystals as part of a conscious world.
Also ich betrachte Steine durchaus als Lebens.
So I do view stones as life forms. If you view the time in a geological scale and begin to think in millions of years, you'll see that even in the realm of stones there are developments. That stones are born from the depths of the earth, and that they have their period in which they exist at the surface, and then pass away again, are dissolved and reformed into other rocks. For me, these are also life processes that we as people do not normally notice. If you consider this dimension, then certainly also communication between man and stone can happen.
Mensch und Stein entstehen.
Entering into a stone circle of Earthkeeper crystals, we can recognize their effect on their immediate surroundings as carriers of a specific consciousness. Over the years, Wolfgang Hahl, a visionary and spiritual teacher, has collected many impressively large crystals. He has created an extensive network of powerful crystals with the goal of helping harmonize the energy body of the Earth itself through their healing properties.
Der Name Erdenhüterkristalle leitet sich von alten indianischen
The name Earthkeeper crystals derived from ancient Indian prophecy. In these prophecies, the appearance of huge crystals will be announced at this time. It is said that ages ago, beings of light, our creators, went into huge crystal bodies to act in the future as protectors for the earth and for humanity, and to stay there until then. If we remember that quartz is the only imperishable material in the universe, then that makes sense. Because rock crystals can, as we have heard, lie millions of years in the earth without decaying. And so, say Indian legends, would end this period, when humans increasingly destroy the earth and devastate nature. These beings of light would become active when their bodies are found in the earth, taken out, and are able to spread their healing properties.
diese Lichtwesen ihre heilende Wirkung verbreiten können. Das Ganze fing damit an, dass ich
The whole thing started 25 years ago when, after a seminar in a meditation, I had a vision of the earth spirit. I heard in my mind at the same time a voice instructing me exactly and explaining that the future would be about me gathering so-called Earthkeeper crystals from around the world and to use them for earth healing. That it was necessary to save these giant crystals and protect them, and that these giant crystals were urgently needed for the stabilization of the energy field of the earth, but also to raise the human consciousness, and that it was my job to start this process. This seemed, of course, to me to be just as crazy as it sounds to anybody hearing this first. As a result, I ignored the whole thing for a while, until actually several worldwide active merchants spontaneously invited me to visit them in Brazil. After the third invitation, I thought, this cannot be a coincidence anymore, and accepted the invitation. And in fact, on the same day, when I arrived in Brazil, for the first time after a long time, huge golden yellow citrine crystals had been found. Now there are many interesting events to tell about them. But in summary, let me say that this was the first Earthkeeper crystal that came into my life, and that it took several days of negotiations in order to save this crystal from cutting and grinding. In the following years, hundreds of giant crystals were brought to me in mysterious ways and under the strangest circumstances, even in periods when I considered this more of a curse than a blessing, when I had to spend my time again and sacrificing all my money in order to save these large crystals from being cut. When crystals find their way to us, find their way into our lives, we should always make ourselves aware that we are not their owners, but realize that we are just a blip in comparison to these crystal beings, that they may exist for hundreds of millions of years and will continue to exist for even billions of years if they are not physically destroyed, and that we are relatively short-lived beings in comparison to them.
Im Vergleich zu ihnen. Sämtliche hier auf diesem Platz und in unserem
All the giant crystals gathered here in the square and in the Museum of the Earthkeeper crystals perhaps represent only 1% of the amount of Earthkeeper crystals which were brought to me in the last 20 years. Most of them were passed on to people in healing places, to private homes, to hospitals, to clinics, in order to unfold their healing energy and to support people in their spiritual work.
Energie zu entfalten und Menschen in ihrer spirituellen Arbeit zu unterstützen. Warum das
What this whole thing has to do with earth healing becomes understandable when we realize that the ultimate earth healing is only possible with a global shift in consciousness. What good is it if we plant trees and reforest when the next people go and cut them down again? Consequently, we can only really permanently save or heal the earth if there are more people who are committed to develop their awareness, and that is an essential task of the Earthkeeper crystals.
Ich wünsche mir, dass immer mehr Menschen
I hope that more and more people around the world get together in groups to operate in meditations with Earthkeeper crystals to heal the earth. The more we open our hearts to compassion for all other creatures, and out of compassion the need arises to heal, the more the spiritual forces bring us the supporters and helpers. Ultimately, this means that they will help us grow our consciousness. The whole world is speaking of a rise in consciousness, to the extent that we wake up eventually to a higher truth, namely the truth that we are all one, that we are all cells of a large body. The crystal entities have given me a very touching message, that they are not only the oldest beings and the first beings who were on Earth, but also that they will be the last ones to leave. that it is their duty to manifest the divine light of the universe here on earth. And they therefore had to emerge as the first here, had to get a form, and will pass away as last, when all is gone, when this earth, this sun is remelted. This touched me greatly, to make myself aware of this.
I have searched for the deeper relationship between humans and crystals, and I have found a treasure that cannot be measured in carats. It is the relationship that humans and stones can ennoble each other. To become crystalline from within does not mean solidifying, not petrification, but establishing a coherence both in our bodies and consciousness.